Well, welcome to episode 52 of the MMA Rundown podcast. I was planning on doing this on Sunday, but there was a ton of news that just dropped today, so I figured I might as well at least have a podcast right now just to talk about all the fights that were announced for UFC 249, talk about the location possibilities as far as where they're going to go with that, have some reactions on that. And then as far as the Sunday episode, I'll probably touch on this a little bit then, but this is more instant reactions right now. So just reading bottom to top on what the UFC 249 full card is going to be, we're going to have Ryan Spann versus Sam Alvey, Sajara Eubanks versus Sarah Morris. I'm not sure who Johnson is here, but Kama Worthy looks like he's making his return at lightweight. Looks like Cheeto Vera is going to be fighting Ray Borg. Alex Hernandez will not be fighting against Islam Makhachev. He's going to be fighting, I believe his name is Omar Morales, but Morales is the last name. The graphic I'm reading off of right now from the UFC just has last names, not first names, so I'm trying to put everything together here. Then we have a pretty good fight at middleweight. We got Uriah Hall versus Jacare Souza. We have Francis Ngannou versus Jairzinho Rozenstruik moving from the main event in Columbus on March 28th onto this main card here. Great featherweight fight between Jeremy Stephens and Calvin Kattar. Vicente Luque versus Nico Price, and just a fantastic fight at welterweight. I don't know if this order is correct, but right now it's saying that the third fight on the main card is going to be Greg Hardy versus Jorgen De Castro. I guess if they feel like he's going to sell pay-per-views, then that's why they put him there. We've got Jessica Andrade versus Rose Namajunas too, and then in the main event, Tony Ferguson staying on the card. They weren't able to get Khabib Nurmagomedov back, even though it sounds like this is going to be taking place in America and probably somewhere near California. So as a result, he is being replaced by Justin Gaethje. So I'm going to put most of my focus in this here about that main event. And first and foremost, I really want to see UFC 249 take place. I'm very happy that by all signs right now, it looks like this event is going to happen. We are going to get UFC 249. We're going to get it on April 18th, just as we had hoped for a while. We're not getting the main event that we had asked for. But we are getting a live MMA event right now. It seems like it's going to be one of the first major sports that's going to be coming back. So I'm pretty thankful for that. I hope everything works out, and I'm very excited about it. Gaethje versus Ferguson is going to be a great fight. Very interesting fight. A lot of different things to break down. A lot of different possibilities for how this fight can go. And I'm really enjoying that. On a little bit more of a negative note, and to be fair, if your interest is just in who can beat all the other guys in their division, if you're going to lose, then you're going to lose, so be it. You probably aren't going to be as bothered by this. For me, lightweight's such a deep division that some guys match up better with others. And the fight between Tony Ferguson and Khabib Nurmagomedov, not just because Tony Ferguson's had a 12-fight win streak, but because of Tony's style, it's just a stylistic matchup that I really badly want to see. And so with Tony taking a fight in the meantime, I'd prefer that he'd fight against someone who I think is a better stylistic matchup for him than Gaethje. Now, like I said before, this isn't me saying, oh, no, why'd you make this fight? Like, I'm very happy they made the fight. I'm definitely going to watch it. I'm going to enjoy it. I'm going to enjoy breaking it down. I'm going to enjoy watching it. And I'm going to enjoy seeing what happens when they fight. But there is some concern on my end that this isn't necessarily the best matchup for Ferguson. If you look at Tony Ferguson, you look at what his greatest weaknesses are, I would say the biggest one for him is that he's a pressure fighter, but he fights with his hands down a lot. He gets clipped a lot, and oftentimes relies on his chin being able to take some huge shots, his ability to recover, and his ability to wear on his opponents over time. For Gaethje, because of his wrestling background, you'd figure that if he is able to rock Ferguson, that Ferguson's not really going to be able to wrestle his way out of that situation. He's going to have to just kind of get his hands up and find a way to get Gaethje off of him, which it's not as though he can't do it, but it's one less option for him. And then Gaethje, when you look at what he's been successful with in his last 3 fights, he's been very successful about setting up generally one or two, mostly one big shot, landing that shot, and then putting his opponent out with that shot. Did it well with Edson Barboza, where he was able to use his footwork to kind of like trap him, and as he saw Edson was starting to circle out towards his right, he was able to land the right hand just at the end of the hand and got a knockout just right off of that. I don't remember the exact setup for the Cowboy Cerrone knockout. That one was more towards the middle of the octagon, but again, he was setting him up, landed in 1 or 2 big shots, and then Cowboy was down on the ground and was pretty much done at that point. Even James Vick was able to set up that overhand right and knock him out. So a lot of what we've seen from Gaethje lately is he's been very good about sort of setting up single shots or setting up a big shot here and there, about landing it, and then when he does land it, getting a finish very quickly off of it, assuming that he even needs to follow up after the shot lands. And with Tony Ferguson being a guy who isn't the most defensively conscious fighter, a guy whose defense is oftentimes his offense, where rather than like slipping out of the way or getting his hand up to block, he'll just throw so many punches that you're just blocking and you're not throwing because you're constantly worried about what he's doing. With Gaethje, he's not necessarily going to be the guy who just clams up if you start throwing at him and isn't going to throw back. He's definitely going to throw back, and there seems like there's a pretty good chance that he's going to land something hard on Tony Ferguson. So the question is going to be, if Gaethje does clip Ferguson, is it going to be with him just moving forward and setting up a shot? Is it going to be him countering? If he does rock Tony Ferguson, which seems fairly likely, and one of the things that people have talked about with the Khabib fight is that Tony's getting older, and you figure that there's some deterioration with that. Typically, the deterioration that comes when you're older, you're a little bit slower. Your reaction time isn't quite as good. Your chin typically is going to go backwards. But strength-wise, you're generally going to keep a lot of the strength. And technique-wise, especially in the grappling areas, sometimes, although you might not have as good of timing there, the technique's generally going to improve if you're still training. So with the Khabib fight, the concern about Tony being a tad bit slower, the concern about him having less of an ability to take a shot, it's not quite as big of a deal as it would be with a guy like Gaethje. Do I think that Tony Ferguson's at a point now where he's just taking so much damage in his career and in the gym that Gaethje's just going to have to hit him once, and at that point he's just going straight out. He's not going to even have a chance to kind of fumble around and work his way back in like he did with Venat and like he did with Pettis. I don't know about that, but it is a concern of mine, and I feel like there is a very strong likelihood that Gaethje's going to take some heavy shot or going to give some heavy shots before this fight's over. So how Ferguson's able to handle him is going to be interesting. And again, like I mentioned, if Gaethje does knock him out and get the win here, Gaethje is the interim champion, and he would then be next in line for Khabib, which in itself is a very compelling fight regardless. I mean, Gaethje versus Khabib has plenty of other interesting aspects to it as well. With Tony, it's more so we think Khabib's probably going to be able to take him down. What's going to happen when it hits the mat? With Gaethje, it's more, is he going to be able to take him down? Because Gaethje's a former D1 All-American wrestler, and then he's also a really dangerous striker. So he tends to have more one-shot knockouts than Ferguson does. So there are different aspects about it. I would still be very excited to see Gaethje versus Khabib, but I really do want to see the Tony versus Khabib fight. So I'm a little bit concerned that this matchup might be a little bit tough for Ferguson. If you look at the people who have given Gaethje issues in the past, generally it's really technical strikers. So he had a lot of trouble with Eddie Alvarez, who was picking the shots on him, going body head, mixing it up really well. He also had issues with Dustin Poirier, who was using a fairly similar game plan. Both of those fights were wars, though. Eddie and Dustin Poirier both took some pretty heavy shots before they were able to put Gaethje away. Tony Ferguson does mix it up as well. He has some good kicks to the body that he'll use. He'll mix up his punches too. But he's not quite as technical. His defense isn't quite as good as those guys. So whereas those guys were able to block some shots and sort of weather some storms, with Ferguson you're a little bit more worried that if he keeps his hands down the entire time and relies on his head movement, relies on his reaction time, especially with all the time that he's been in the UFC, all the film that's out on him, you would have to figure that Gaethje and his coach, I believe Brandon Gibson's his coach, they definitely found some tendencies and found some areas where Gaethje can set up that big shot. So he's got a really good chance at winning this fight. His biggest weakness isn't necessarily the biggest strength for Tony Ferguson. We haven't really seen Gaethje necessarily get gassed out and worn out over the course of the fight, although I wouldn't put it past Ferguson to do that to him. But it's definitely an interesting fight. It's just, for me, there's a little bit of worry that Gaethje is a bit of a tough matchup for Ferguson, and if Gaethje's able to get the win here, that we're not going to get that Ferguson versus Khabib fight, not only not this year, but possibly ever, especially given the age of Tony Ferguson. So, with that being said, as you can kind of tell, there are a lot of different ways to break down this fight in and of itself. It's definitely an interesting fight. It's a fight I'm going to be thinking more and more about as we get closer. I'll try to see if I can find any examples of Gaethje having to defend against takedowns. For Tony, does he think that he's going to be able to get into a clinch and sort of like snap him down and sort of work to the mat that way? Because he has a lot of attacks off the ground. He's really good with darces, and he can hit those darces without the fight even hitting the mat. He can hit them standing. So it'd be interesting to see if Ferguson's going to try to set those up too. But it's going to be a tough matchup for Tony, obviously, because he's got some defensive holes, and Gaethje's the kind of guy who can definitely take advantage of that. For Gaethje, he's going up against a relentless guy, a guy who's very skilled. Gaethje didn't really have a great training camp leading into this. So it's tough to keep pace with Tony Ferguson in general, but especially on a training camp like this, that's not going to make it any easier. So that can be a challenge for Gaethje. Tony also mixes up his strikes fairly well. Really aggressive, can back you into a corner. So it's not an easy fight for Gaethje, but it's not going to be an easy fight for Ferguson either. And it's definitely one that I want to see, but I have some worries that there may have been some easier matchups for Ferguson. I think for Ferguson, if you're looking at the worst matchups that he could possibly have in the lightweight division, you're probably looking mostly at guys who are really precise strikers, and power punchers at that. Conor would probably be up there if you're just looking at like a round or two. You'd have to figure out like the first round or two that Conor would be dangerous for Tony. Now, I would imagine if the two fought that there's a decent chance that Tony's able to weather the storm there and then really put it on Conor late, because we've really seen Conor struggle with his pacing late in fights, whereas Tony thrives there. So you would know that if Conor and Tony fight and the fight gets past the second round, like major advantage for Tony Ferguson. Or in the early rounds, especially in the first round, you would figure that the boxing advantage that Conor McGregor has would put him in a position where he can land some heavy shots on Tony and maybe even get to the point where he's able to get a finish. But that's a fight where that'd be a tough one, just because of that first round where it's like you don't know what's going to happen in the first probably 5 to 8 minutes. The Gaethje fight's very difficult for the reasons that I just explained. Beyond that, I'd have to say like that's got to be up there for the most difficult matchups for him. I guess you could also argue that Khabib's a difficult matchup, but that's one of those ones where we're going to have to see how it plays out. Whether Khabib's grappling plays into Tony Ferguson, whether Khabib's holes in his striking game play into Tony Ferguson's strengths. I mean, that all remains to be seen. That's all what we wanted to see, but I'm more than happy to watch this Ferguson versus Gaethje fight, and even if Gaethje does win, I'd be happy to watch Gaethje fight against Khabib Nurmagomedov. It's just, this is a fight that we've wanted for so long, this Tony versus Khabib fight, and it's a little worrisome to me that the fight could potentially be taken away because he's taking on a really difficult matchup at the last second. But I just respect the hell out of Tony Ferguson for staying in it and for taking this fight. He doesn't seem like the kind of guy who, anytime that he makes some money from a fight, that he's just going to throw it all away and just kind of spend it and then run himself down to the wire until he has to fight again. I don't think that he would have had any issues had he not taken this fight, but he decided to stay in and take the fight regardless, even though Khabib decided to back out. As far as deciding to back out, I don't know what sort of options were at play for Khabib to get back into the States. It does seem like this fight is going to take place in the States right now. The place that a lot of people are talking about is at the Tachi Palace, which I believe is in California, on an Indian reservation, so it's outside of the California State Athletic Commission. But to me, it's tough. I'd imagine that they probably put in the effort to try to make it work. Islam Makhachev's also off the card. Islam Makhachev also will not be making any money off of this because he's not going to be able to fight. So you would figure that both of them would have wanted to fight if they could have, but for them, they were in California training. It makes a lot of sense to assume that California, being the type of state that they are, would have been very quick to start locking people down. If you would have asked me, or really asked most people back in March, back when he did decide to go back to Russia, what place is most likely to lock down first between California, Abu Dhabi, and Russia, California would have had to have been your top choice. And it's just kind of weird how it works out, where it seems as though Tony, who lives in California, is going to be able to take this fight. It seems as though had Khabib stayed in California, he'd been able to take the fight, but apparently Russia a little bit more strict on that, even though Khabib is like a national hero out there. So kind of unfortunate how that worked out. Definitely wish we would have gotten Khabib in the main event, but this is still a great main event that we're getting, and there's a lot to look forward to it. As far as the other fights on the card, Andrade versus Namajunas was originally on the card. It's staying on the card. If Jessica Andrade wins, probably not going to get a title fight right away because of how bad the loss was to the current champion. If Rose Namajunas gets the win, you could make an argument that she's there for a title fight. I think for the most part, people want to see a rematch between Zhang Weili and Joanna, but both of them took a beating in that fight, so it's hard to tell what the timeline is going to be for them to be ready. It seems like Joanna's probably okay. If you're having a title fight, obviously you need the champion, so it seems as though Joanna probably is going to get that next fight, but if Rose does get a dominant win here, she could definitely have a case for leapfrogging Joanna and taking that next title fight. The only other name out there that would probably make a lot of sense for a title shot at this point is Tatiana Suarez, but as I mentioned on yesterday's podcast, Tatiana has had no luck with her neck in terms of it improving, and in terms of her getting any closer to returning to just full practice, let alone competition. So she's really not in that title picture right now. So right now it's mostly Joanna and possibly Rose if Rose gets a nice win here. Next fight between Greg Hardy and Yorgan De Castro. I mean, just two big heavy guys who hit really hard. It'll be a fun fight. It's not as though I think this is going to be a fight that's going to mean a whole lot for the division. Greg Hardy had some decent wins early on, beat Juan Adams. Looked like he had a win over Ben Sisoli before the whole asthma gate, which I guess is sort of funny that right now we have all these concerns about a respiratory illness, and the poster boy of respiratory conditions for the UFC is going to be on the card, but I'm not terribly concerned that he's going to catch the coronavirus. As I mentioned before, there was that event that took place in Brazil a couple days after a lot of the other leagues had shut down, and so far we've heard zero stories of anyone, not just the fighters, but just anyone participating in general, coming down with the coronavirus. And given how aggressive the media has been towards trying to vilify the UFC, you would imagine that if any of them did catch the coronavirus, especially around a timeline similar to when that fight took place, that you would have heard all about it. So with that being the case, with there being a lot more testing available now, with there being a lot more information available now, I would imagine the UFC is going to do a really good job about keeping everyone isolated here, and they're not going to let people in who test positive for the virus. The people who are allowed in are all going to be negative. And as I mentioned in a tweet, like, the idea behind social distancing isn't that if a bunch of people come together, then like the gods just summon the coronavirus and it just encapsulates everyone who's within a group of 10 people or more. The idea is that the more people that are around each other, the higher chance there is of someone catching it. But if you have a group of 100,000 people together and no one has the virus, you're not getting the virus. But if you have a group of like 5 people together and one of them has the virus and he's coughing all over the place, then everyone's probably going to get it. So the real issue here is making sure that no one has the virus, and if they do that, they're not around anyone else. If the UFC is able to confirm that, and with the increase in testing, you would have to imagine they're going to have tests available to them. If they're able to confirm that, I don't have an issue with them running forward with this. I think everything will be fine there. So I'm sure Greg Hardy will be fine as well. Although if Greg Hardy ends up catching coronavirus and dying of coronavirus, that'd be just a wild 2020 story. Fight before that is Vicente Luque versus Nico Price. I believe these guys fought before, and I think Luque won that fight. It's just a battle of just really violent welterweights. Luque is a guy who's sort of hovering around that top 15 range, starting to like work his way up. Had a tough fight against Wonderboy Thompson, which just wasn't a great stylistic matchup for him. Just ended up being a striking match with a much better striker than him. But he's still relatively competitive, was able to take some pretty heavy shots and keep coming forward. Nico Price, just very aggressive, finds ways to finish from a lot of different areas. So this is one of those fights where you'd figure there's a good chance of a finish, and if there's no finish, it's going to be a contender for fight of the night. Jeremy Stephens versus Calvin Kattar. Stephens always hanging around the top eight, sometimes getting up to like top 4, top 5 at the featherweight. Calvin Kattar coming off of a loss to Zabit. Kattar is one of those guys I've been looking at, though, as one of the better guys and more unheralded guys in the division. He had some trouble with Zabit's unorthodox kicks and was having trouble making some reads on Zabit early on, but was able to make his reads as the fight went on, won the 3rd round. Had it been a 5-round main event, maybe he's able to win 4 and 5 and get the win there, but that's not how it ended up working out. For Jeremy Stephens, very dangerous guy. Tends to be a little bit more loopy with his punches. Not that he's not technical, he definitely is technical. But there are some more technical guys in the division who can give him trouble. There was the fight he had with Renato Moicano, where Moicano just kind of boxed him up. I'd figure that's probably how this fight's going to go as well. I would think that Kattar's probably going to box him up as well and win this fight on the feet. But with that being said, Stephens is still very dangerous. He's got a lot of good tricks himself, and it wouldn't shock me if he's able to land something big and get a huge win here for himself. Then we got Uriah Hall versus Jacare Souza. Uriah Hall recently had a win over Antonio Carlos Jr., Shoeface, who's also a black belt world champion. Not quite as decorated in the jiu-jitsu world as Jacare, but he's still very decorated himself. And what we saw in that fight was Uriah Hall, though he got taken down early, was able to avoid getting submitted, and then later on was able to find his way back to his feet and was just dominating on the feet. So for Jacare, if he is able to get Uriah Hall down, Jacare is obviously capable of getting his finishes. His top game, I would say, is probably a lot better than Antonio Carlos Jr.'s, and by a lot, I'm not saying that Antonio's got a bad top game, but just Jacare has a fantastic top game. It's more so to that point. So if Jacare is able to get the takedown, there's a decent chance that, unlike Antonio, Jacare will be able to get a finish, but that's no guarantee. And if what we saw at light heavyweight is what we're going to see here, where Jacare just really isn't doing much on the feet to set up his takedowns, not really throwing a whole lot of punches, not really mixing in kicks, punches, level changes. He's just kind of like running forward and trying to get a clinch up against the fence. He may have some trouble taking Hall down, and for as much as this fight takes place on the feet, especially if Jacare just wants to get this to the ground and really isn't trying to strike with Uriah at any point, we could definitely see Uriah take over and even get a pretty dominant win here. So it'll be interesting to see here. I just haven't liked what I've seen from Jacare recently in terms of how he's been mixing up his strikes and his takedowns. It seems as though he's just been trying to run forward and take guys down rather than set it up with the strikes. He's done well in the past setting things up with his strikes. He's had some nice knockouts in the process of trying to set his takedowns up with strikes. And if he takes this fight, granted Uriah Hall is a very dangerous striker, but if he takes this, with the sole purpose of trying to run forward, run him up against the fence, and try to drag him to the mat. I don't know that that's going to be the most successful thing for him, and it can end in a pretty bad fashion for him. Then we got Alexander Hernandez. He'll have that fight with Morales. Don't know a whole lot about Morales, so it's tough for me to break that fight down. Marlon Vera was supposed to fight Eddie Wineland. He's now going to be fighting Ray Borg. This will be interesting, especially if it goes to the mat. Vera's got a really interesting jiu-jitsu style, trains with 10 Planet, likes to attack a lot off his back. Borg is very aggressive from top, very active, really good guard passer. Not necessarily the best guy at once he passes your guard at like staying in that position and constantly moving forward, but he does move quite a bit and gets in a lot of cool transitions. So if this fight does go to the mat, if Borg is successful in bringing it to the mat, we could definitely see some really cool scrambles. It'll be interesting to see if Ray Borg's able to make weight here, especially given the whole situation. I think just in general, talking about the card, if everyone's able to make weight, that'd be pretty surprising, especially for that title fight. Gaethje, I'd imagine he has the resources he needs to make weight. Ferguson, he's a rather big guy, but I think he's been training as if everything's on schedule, so I'm sure he'll find a way to make it as well. But in this fight here, Ray Borg's had some issues in the past making weight, so we'd hope that he makes it here. But then as long as his fight's on the feet, Vera's also pretty good with his kicks and knees on the feet as well, so this could be a pretty exciting fight. Then we've got Johnson versus Worthy. I'm not sure who the Johnson is, and Common Worthy just had that one really nice knockout in his debut. I think he was like a plus 600 underdog at that point. Sajara Eubanks versus Sarah Morris, don't really have much to say about that. And then Ryan Spann versus Sam Alvey. I guess it's nice to see Sam Alvey get on the card. Alvey was criticized a lot a few weeks back for saying that he felt like the response to the coronavirus was overblown, that shutting absolutely everything down, shutting down the economy, shutting down all these events was a bit disproportionate, and people were just ripping into him for saying that. So it's kind of nice to see that at least he's getting an opportunity to make a paycheck here and get a fight with Ryan Spann. So that covers it for UFC 249. Like I mentioned, I'll have another podcast on Sunday. I guess in this case that'll probably be episode 53 unless some other major story pops up during the week and I decide to make a podcast episode out of it rather than just a normal video. So I guess we'll just leave it at that, and I'll talk to you guys in 6 days from now.